First of all, thanks everyone for joining. I really appreciate everyone signing up and taking an hour out of their evening to come and have a listen and hopefully have a little bit of a conversation as well. Just a little bit of housekeeping at the top of this. There is a Q&A chat that is open. So if you do have any questions throughout the course of this webinar, please feel free to drop them in. We'll allocate some time towards the end to make sure we can get through as many of them as possible. If we can't get through everything, we'll do our best to make sure that we follow up and answer anything that hasn't been answered. But I'm going to kick off and I'm just going to share my screen briefly. Hopefully everyone can now see my screen. Today, we're really here to speak about the evolution of personalization and give a little bit of history and a little bit of context as to how we've got here and where we're going. And although I suppose that this death to one size fits all feels a little bit dramatic, I think it's probably right where we are as an industry now, as the rate of change and the rate of new technologies that are coming into our practice have really accelerated. So let's dive straight in. And I want to dive straight in just by speaking about some very practical examples. And again, just trying to work through some situations that we as practitioners have been in or are continuously in. So let's say we have some footballers, and I'm going to put a bit of a focus on team sport more than anything today. I think there's other webinars where we've gone through endurance in more detail. Let's say we have some footballers and it's a match day +2. We've got a 90-minute pitch session and maybe we have a predicted RPE from the coach that it should be approximately a 4. And we know what sort of average distances and high speed running we should be covering. So now going into the session, we as practitioners have a bit of detail. There are some limitations in the detail that we'll come back to in a second. And we have athletes that are all different body weights, different shapes, different sizes. And I think if we look at what we've perceived to be, let's say, gold standard from an applied practice perspective, if we start to dive into things like consensus statements and position stands, and we start to pull out, okay, for in-season training with approximately these loads, these distance, where somebody should be fitting their fueling, and if we look at here, we're sort of right in the middle of what they've perceived over here on other training days of the week. So let's say around the 4.5 gram per kilo mark. So let's put that up there for a second and dive in. I think a lot of individuals on this call, and certainly what we've seen a lot of, both myself as a practitioner and then more recently in our work with Hexis, is looking to these consensus statements and then pulling out, this is approximately how many grams of carbohydrate we might need to fuel this activity, and then start to apply that gram per kilo range to a body weight. And I think today I really just want to challenge this and challenge where we think we're at in terms of the level of detail, the level of sophistication, and the level of personalization we can bring. It seems where we are is we're in a space where there's an illusion of personalization that's going on, where we're taking general guidelines that have been based on averages and consensuses that have approximate target ranges that are being applied to an individual. But because it's being applied to an individual's body weight, there's a perception that becomes specific to that individual's unique requirements. So let's take this a little step further and let's start to dig a little bit deeper into why this might be an illusion as opposed to something that is truly personalized in practice. So let's start at the top, the data that we have on the session. The first thing you started to see here was the duration of the session. Right now, we know that they're on field for approximately 90 minutes. Now, some people may go out a little bit before training, a little bit after training. That 90 minutes is not continuous. This isn't a linear energetic sport where people are going to be performing at the same intensity. There's unknown rest periods. So straight away, we have one limitation around the time. We can predict, and I think it's important that we do our best to predict. But again, the loop needs to be considered around the actuals. We also have, let's say, predicted RPEs that come in, or predicted intensities. Again, very important but those predicted intensities could vary individual to individual. And again, we're looking at then averages when we're starting to look at what the session demands are. What are the typical loads that somebody might be exposed to? And when we start to maybe, again, fictional data on the screen here for the sake of argument, when we start to look at how, even amongst three players, how this could vary, somebody that goes out a little bit earlier because maybe they need to do some extended warm up, their distance as a result is slightly higher. Maybe there's been a few more accelerations, and as a result, high speed running starts to pick up, and overall RPE is a little bit higher over here. Again, we have somebody here who's maybe closer to the actual target, and then somebody over here again who maybe stays out a little bit longer because, again, they need to get a little bit of extra work done. There's a feeling that they're working on, there's some skill or execution that they're working on. High speed running is the same, maybe total distance is a little bit up. But then when we start to compare these with predicted loads, straight away we start to see where errors start to creep in. We're up in the, 10% under, 10% over, 20% over, 20% under. And it starts to draw into question when we're looking at these individual targets, are we really just in a space of educated guessing and we're trying to make an informed guess based on a consensus that has acknowledged its own limitations, but has been a very important body of work. And for those of us that are working in team sports, and I will say myself as a practitioner, it's very challenging because this is very time consuming. And certainly looking to get this done on an individual basis for everyone becomes even more challenging. If we go a step further and just to throw another spanner in the works, we're just looking at that individual session. If we have the athlete on the far right of our screen here happens to have a dog and it's a Cocker Spaniel and it requires a walk early in the morning and a walk late at night, all of a sudden there's a different lifestyle activity component associated with that individual that will be driving different energetic demands. The player on the left may not have told anyone at the club, but maybe they're meeting their friend in the afternoon for a game of paddle. These are all very practical that we see come to life, not just on occasion, but on a weekly basis within squads of 20, 30 plus, when everyone starts to have different lifestyle factors, friends and social circles, and additional considerations that ultimately, when we look at this original application of personalisation, starts to draw in this additional range for errors. Now, if we then multiply that out across an average first team squad, let's say in the UK, approximately 30 players taking part in approximately 10 sessions a week. If we go back to where we were maybe 5 minutes ago and we start to consider what we think is personalization and then how far off we actually might be, it becomes an interesting place to start to at least have a conversation as an industry and understand, well, what can we do and how can we work together to help solve these problems? Because one thing is for certain, we're definitely getting flooded with more data. That data is improving in accuracy. I think we can all acknowledge that not everything is there yet, but the rate and the pace of change has never been faster, and which is very positive to see. And so if I go back to this block of work where, again, focusing on team sport and focusing on football, this has been a phenomenal piece of work by some fantastic practitioners and minds that have come together to help us better understand how we can be driving influence in the environments that we work in and how we can be better applying the existing knowledge that we have around nutrition strategies. So I think it is hugely important to recognize that, but it's also important to start to challenge where we are today and then how we can move forward as a group, as an industry, and as a community of practitioners. And so with those guidelines coming out in 2020, the first question I think we should ask ourselves is, what's changed in reality? I don't think players have gotten dramatically fitter or faster. The games are equally as competitive. Pressure and stakes they're always high in leagues like the Premier League. But one thing that's undeniable, that's really accelerated, I wouldn't even say in the last decade, we're talking about in the last 3 years, 2 years, 1 year. At this moment in time, it's almost every week. Our ability to measure things, our ability to actually use and leverage data to make inferences and help inform decisions has dramatically improved. And not just across one area of that sporting ecosystem, but quite frankly, across the whole industry. I've put a little asterisk beside everything here because I think it's important that we acknowledge that not everything that is used to capture data is perfect. There are certain tools that have better and slightly worse degrees of accuracy, but what they are doing is they are improving, and they are improving a hell of a lot faster than they ever have been. And their implementation and usability has been the best that they ever have been. So right now we're in this era that our ability to take this and leverage it to apply some personalized prescriptions is absolutely at the right time. And I think this is a good moment to just maybe press pause, on for ourselves as a group and start to question, well, how did we get here? And then better understand, where are we going? What is our direction of travel as an industry, as a group of practitioners? And I think everyone that's dialed into this call, I really appreciate you being here, as I think it shows there's a genuine interest and passion in this space that we want to try solve together, and that there's an awareness that we can be moving the industry forward together. So if we go back to how did we get here, if we look back to the original origins, and again, going right back to the earlier days when we started off by just understanding and looking at how gas analysis was used, and early breakthroughs in technology helped us better understand um, uh, oxidate our fuel usage. Then we started to see percutaneous biopsy needles come in to start to be able to actually understand glycogen in muscle. But it wasn't really until the 1980s and probably the 1990s that we became a discipline. There was a lot of, let's say, physiology research, and some all of the classics research is still heavily influencing our practice to date. But it was more through the work of Professor Louise Burke and Ron Moen when the discipline started to form. I think in the 90s we were quite a heavy, I want to say there was a lot of time was spent on ergogenic aids. But more recently, the work of Professor Morton in particular has really helped to drive on our understanding of some of those molecular mechanisms that are involved in not just how to fuel and recover from exercise, but how to amplify or dampen how our body responds to that stimulus. But it has been a bit of a journey. And I think that's reflected when we start to actually look at the number of publications that have come out, in particular over the last 15 years or 15 or 20 years. There's been a 17-fold increase in the number of publications that have come out in the sports nutrition literature in the last 20 years, which I think is the academic side of it is one thing to look at. I think the thing that really interests me as a practitioner, and very much a practitioner that went back to academia as opposed to the other way around, is how it's impacting us as our own industry. If we look at the same time frame, let's say the last 20 years, the role of the sports nutritionist or the performance nutritionist has transitioned. We started off as consultants, a few days a month here, a few days a month there. That then evolved into part-time roles. In the last few years, we've seen a lot of those part-time roles become full-time roles. Not all of them have got there, but a lot of them have. And I think most recently in the last 24 to 36 months, what we've seen is an acceleration where organizations now have multi-practitioner departments. That's all happened within the space of about 15 years. And again, the importance and the recognition of nutrition and its role in the physical performance domain is really starting to get recognized, and mostly because it's been better understood. Like we said, we've had the researchers from a wide range of universities start to actually quantitatively demonstrate the impacts that manipulating fuel before, during, and after can have on performance. To the extent where we've seen senior practitioners, people who have been heads of nutrition transition into heads of performance because that understanding of the whole ecosystem is centered right around that exercise physiology and understanding metabolism. And I think there's some individuals that have done a fantastic job and will continue to do a fantastic job. And I think many practitioners who are currently leading departments see that as a pathway. I think probably most importantly for us, all of this evolution and all of this rapid rise, nutrition was 10, 15 years ago. It was and it felt like a box tick. I certainly as a practitioner was brought into places probably because they felt like they needed a nutritionist, but didn't necessarily know what to do with one. I think we've done a great job to transition into becoming critical infrastructure. Everyone here has a important role in the health and performance of that organization, that squad, and the overall results that are driven as from that group of individuals. Now, if we just look at that last 15 years and we start to overlap it with what's happened in sports technologies, we've also seen the emergence of data capture and tracking devices that have come out that are in more ecologically valid settings. We've been able to transition away from lab. We have our power meters on bikes being able to capture actual power data during sessions. We've got GPS devices on the pitches that are now capturing various locomotive activities, total distance, high speed running, accelerations, decelerations, bounce rates, etc. A good marker of external load. And then we also have markers of internal load. Heart rate data has been coming out. We've now seen the integration of camera-based technology as well and computer vision, being able to go a step deeper than current GPS metrics and start to understand limb movement, sweat sensors, capturing velocity, and then more recently, even capturing, again, in sort of more at-home settings, exogenous carbohydrate oxidation rates as well. So we've seen this rapid rise and we're continuing to see this rapid rise. So sports technology and the ability for us to get data and get quite useful data is really on the up. It just so happens probably at the same time, we've started to see more of this, maybe less so in the last 15 years, more so in the last seven years, really start to permeate into the population, where actually that sports technology has now evolved into consumer technology, which is being more broadly adopted. A lot of cyclists will have their own power meters. Individuals will have Oura rings or Whoop bands. Some people might be using continuous glucose monitors or lactate monitors more recently, like some London-based groups have done a great job of, arm straps and Apple Watches. And I think really what's happened is we've started to see a huge collision. These three things have collided at the same time. Sports nutrition has rapidly increased in popularity and also actual understanding of impact. We have more data than we've ever had before about an individual captured during their actual sessions. And there is a consumer understanding of what these metrics are to varying degrees. But at the same time, there is a permeation into that individual, and athletes are humans at the end of the day. They're still going to get exposed to these different things. So this industry collision has probably led to three outcomes. We're starting to see the consumer and the athlete really start to heavily overlap. There's an awareness, not just in the athletes, but also in the consumer of what technologies could help my performance. And again, the reason I say it's a quite bi-directional when we look at it, this awareness, the experiences that these technologies are delivering. Many of you might be in football organizations or team sport organizations where an athlete will now come to you and say, I'm using X. I've started to wear an Aura. Can you tell me about it? How can I use this to influence X, Y, or Z in my practice? So it's no longer about the sports organizations delivering interventions and saying, here is what we're looking to do, and here's how you're going to do it. We're starting to see that bottom up flow where athletes are coming into the organizations, taking the consumer technologies and bringing them back to the broader sports organization as well. For us all, it's important to consider that this is incredibly valuable because you actually have an individual who's now motivated to use something that is telling them something about themselves to drive an area of their health or performance. So although the club might have an agenda or an organization might have an agenda or want to use X, Y, or Z, always consider what is the outcome you're looking to deliver. And if an existing tool is better placed to deliver that outcome because there's higher engagement or higher motivation around it, that would be one thing I would challenge everyone to start to think about in their own practice. But with all of this happening and these sort of, let's call them industry dynamics, one thing I've tried to do and take a step back is, and I would encourage everyone who's on this call or spent a little bit of time dialing in, ask yourself what is your strategy? What is your data strategy, if at all? And it's okay that if there's nothing in place at this moment in time, but I think it's now is the inflection point where it's important to consider moving forward over the next number of months, year, how you're going to leverage some of the existing data that's in the organization that is probably siloed from you, or it could be siloed in different departments because they're using it for a different reason, and question how it could be used to create more value to drive some of the interventions that you're looking to deliver at an organization. And really what we're trying to do is transition to, instead of having nutrition and sports science and strength and conditioning and everyone looking after their individual blocks, but in a team, this group of individuals and these data sets should become a lot more fluid in a passive manner as well. So serious strategy considerations that I would like to put forward to everyone is, we are in this era of personalization, whether it's your Spotify playlist, your Instagram or TikTok feed, ads you get hit with. It's now just a general expectation amongst individuals in other aspects of their life. We need to be considering how are we integrating data and delivering those daily personalization experiences, whilst also getting core things in place like implementation intentions. How can we put something there to help reduce cognitive load, make sure there's a structure that somebody can fall back into to drive some of those right outcomes? Do you have a system or do you have a strategy that allows you to deliver your support scalably and continuously? So again, when you're looking at your data strategy, consider how many dependencies in the organization or for the athlete are you currently a bottleneck for? Are you an operational bottleneck because of manual tasks that you need to do? How can you allow yourself to improve your own efficiency and as a result, improve the outcomes that you're delivering in an organization by finding ways to put in scalable solutions? And also, how can you support the autonomy of the athletes you're working with? Not everyone likes to be told what to do. Different people will have different peaks and troughs in motivation that can come at any hour of the week. And if we can put solutions in place that support the autonomy of the athlete and increase their belief in their own capabilities about building that certain behavior, we can be more confident in how we're developing the ecosystem and our environment within that organization over time. So again, serious strategy considerations for everyone on the call. Are you delivering daily personalization? Is it in a scalable and continuous support manner? And again, are you driving the autonomy of each individual as well? This is something I've mentioned over the last number of years, but I keep coming back to. I think really this inflection point means that, I'm over in New York at the minute preparing for the Ryder Cup with the European Ryder Cup team. And I was in Dublin Airport, when was it? Maybe 4 nights ago. We started to see these small robots delivering what people had ordered in the airport. You order a coffee, it now got delivered by a robot. It wasn't delivered by a person. And I have to say, look, honestly, I didn't like it. There's certain elements that I think the humans will always be better at and are always required to do. And I think where we're transitioning to at an industry is doubling down on the strengths that we have as people, where we can drive the most value and the most impact across an organization, which really means bringing in two sides to our approach. We as humans need to make sure we're doubling down on what we are good at. And we are very good at coaching, building relationships, having conversations, building trust, and ultimately going on a journey with an individual where there is an element of relatedness. There, there is that feeling of vulnerability and that we're on a journey together. And those relationships are incredibly important. They will outlast your time working for a club if they're developed well. But ultimately, when we're in that sporting organization, we still need to win. And in sport, winning takes care of pretty much anything. So we need to consider how we're driving efficiency and how we are using new and existing technology to automate the algorithmic tasks in our day to help deliver those experiences, mitigate risk, and ultimately enhance the performance and enhance the standard of care across every athlete that we're working with to make sure that they know how they should be preparing for, they know how they should be fueling during, and they know how they should be recovering from activities, and that is dynamically calibrated as things move and change throughout the day as data starts to flow and become more available. So a consideration for everyone is, when we're looking at these strategies and these implementations, where my thinking has got to is there's an element of sports nutrition that now requires to be always on because we don't know when somebody is going to immediately require some support or when that peak or trough in motivation comes. So if we have a team of a multi-practitioner department where there's a head of nutrition, there is a women's nutritionist, there's a men's nutritionist, and we have an academy nutritionist, a great setup at any organization. I think we'd all be very happy to be working as part of a team. Then consider what of that team is always on. What are those systems? What are those pieces of infrastructure that are delivering and driving service 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to everyone across the organization to make sure that when they need it, it's there. And again, from our side of things at Hexis, this is a journey that we're pretty passionate about. And, probably stemming from, I would say, my own frustration working in team sport and the lack of ability to use some of this data or make it work harder to drive personalization, but also a curiosity about how athletes' information seeking behavior in society had just shifted. All of this, and sort of coming back to it now for us as a group, where are we going as an industry? There are opportunities now to bring in and leverage technology to support practice, to have on 24/7, to make sure that we're delivering these hybrid human and technology-based approaches to enhance the standard of care, improve efficiency, and ultimately enhance performance, both of ourselves as practitioners and the athletes that we're working with. From our side personally, here at Hexis and my own side, starting off as a practitioner who then became a researcher, and in many ways, Hexis is a PhD that has got wildly out of control, but a journey that I'm personally really enjoying. We spent some time really trying to understand what do athletes want and what are practitioners currently delivering and how are they currently delivering practice. That's allowed us to build a two-sided platform, an athlete app for individual athletes, and a web-based application, a web-based platform for coaches and practitioners. Our curiosity is as high as it's ever been. We're having more conversations with practitioners than we've ever had. Our aim and our mission on this journey hasn't changed. Ultimately, the thing that we're most interested in and remain the most interested in is how can we maximize the performance of an individual, and the individual being both the athlete and the practitioner, because we want to be part of those winning performances. We want to help people fundamentally realize their potential. And we've found ways that technology can help implement and integrate that. We're continuing to work with practitioners to deliver new features to drive better insights. And also, I would say the thing that probably is the one that excites me the most is getting to ask better questions. So where we are now, we have built this platform out. We have really transitioned away from the world of static nutrition. Things are no longer even dynamic. They are just continuous. Things will need to replan in real time, need to calibrate in real time, move towards scalable systems that can elevate performance and drive efficiencies. So when we go back to the image that we had right at the top, we have all these athletes lined up in a line. Let's say there could be 40, 50 in this squad. Maybe this looks like the start of some conditioning test. If we want to move towards a high degree of personalization and actually get to the place where we're really driving change, when we start to pull in the right streams of data, it allows us to ask better questions. It allows us to challenge, should we be using internal load or external load? What happens if they did this exact same session in 35 degrees versus 20 degrees? What are the quantifiable differences we can see? How can we adjust our strategy to better support them through that and maximize how they're performing in that session? But ultimately, it's about allowing us to deliver some deeper insights and then also predictively start to model how we can be better supporting them in future. Just to wrap up before we dive into a Q&A, for those of you that haven't heard of the concept of an infinite game, it was put forward by a guy called Professor James Carse, and more recently repopularized by a guy called Simon Sinek. And they really state that there's two types of games in the world. There's finite games, you know, just the same players, there's set rules, people win and people lose. And there's infinite games. There's no winners, there's no losers. The rules change over time, the players change over time. And I truly believe for all of us that have dialed into this call or watched this recording back, or practitioners who are sitting working within organizations, I think the most important thing for us to do as a group and as a collective is to realize that we are part of an infinite game when it comes to the world and industry of sports nutrition. Nobody wins or nobody loses. We're practitioners now. Some people will be career switchers at different points in their life, but we're all trying to drive and improve standards. We're all trying to better understand, better implement, and better support the individuals and organizations we're working with. The pace of change is just so high right now. And our ability to find new ways to innovate, find new ways to personalize has never been more exciting. And I encourage people with their mindsets to just explore that space of possibility of what could happen, what could this service look like, how can the sum of us deliver better outcomes for the next wave of practitioners that come through that will very likely take part in a very different education system. Maybe how we were trained as practitioners will be fundamentally different in the next 5 years and maybe the next 50 years. But it's our job to better understand that, ask the right questions, and work together to get those answers as whilst we're trying to drive the performance of the individuals we're working with. I'm going to dive into some questions now, but I will say before we wrap up, from our side of things at Hexis, we would love if anyone wants to learn more about what we've built, understand or see the features and functionality that are behind the interventions that we deliver, as well as better understand our roadmap, please do get in contact with us. Our email is there. If there are any individuals on this call who are interested in exploring an alternative career, I was never trained to work in technology, but there's definitely a highly transferable skill set from everyone who's been working in high performance sport. We're always interested in people with high levels of intrinsic motivation and people who are keen to explore a possibility space to try something new. So if you're open to sending in an open CV, we're always keen to have a conversation as we start to see where we can grow and take this. I'm going to just stop sharing there and dive back to the Q&A to see if we have any questions that are starting to come in. No questions in there so far, but again, please feel free to ask away. If there's no questions, not a problem at all as well. I appreciate it's later in the evening for some people, and there's probably kids and families and activities to get to. Okay. Can you explain more about autonomy? Because I feel it's very hard to convince players to keep tracking every day. I think it's really important to, so we'll speak about autonomy. Certainly from our side at Hexis, we are not a tracking tool. We do offer the ability to track and log food, to capture food diaries, because that's important at certain times for a practitioner and for an individual to quantify how what their actual behaviors are like, what against what the plan was. We allow them to track and log, not just using manual search, but also using computer vision, sending voice notes, and then also scanning barcodes. I think the most important thing for an individual is to have a plan in place. Do they know what to do next? And how are we using existing data to help you understand what to do next? So at our core, at Hexis, we take planned and completed training data, and then we use that to help inform what you should be doing next to either fuel for or recover from the demands of the activity you're doing. If at a time you want to quantify that, that's no problem at all. But there are certain behaviors that exist before that. Have you built the plan in the first place? Are you checking the plan? All that to come back to autonomy. The most important thing I would say about autonomy is to recognize that individuals can operate very differently. There is a Dutch researcher called Elena Smith who's done some fantastic work where she started to explore different needs for autonomy, and she's classed them as confirmation seekers, people who like to lead essentially, but they like an expert to confirm that what they're doing is the right thing. You've got self-reliers, people that very much like to lead themselves, do not want any additional help. And then you've also got expert dependence. Expert dependence can often be people who are just tell me what to do and I'll do it. Would be how I best describe them. Myself, Sam Impey, and Xiaoxi Yan, we did run a large scale pilot back in 2022 where we profiled 963 athletes for their need for autonomy. We worked with Elena on this, and what we found was fascinating. Athletes display a very uniform need for autonomy. We actually found just over 90% of athletes are what we would call confirmation seekers. They want to lead, but they like us to be able to confirm. So, for example, an athlete might say, I think I should do this. And we can come in and say, I think that's a great idea. You should definitely do what you've suggested. So, the language that we use and how we deliver and interact with interventions becomes really important. It was actually a big reason why we wanted to build an athlete app for us at Hexis, because we wanted to allow the athlete to drive their own nutrition, even though you might be able to, as a practitioner, set up the parameters and the guardrails to make sure that it's delivering the right recommendations in line with your philosophy for that individual. We did find I suppose we did find one group of athletes. Approximately 8% of athletes are what we would call the self-reliers. We found older athletes in particular were more likely to be self-reliers. And the reason when we dug a little bit deeper is they may have worked with 3, 4, 5 nutritionists throughout the course of their career. And they kind of got to the stage they said, look, I've heard different things from different people. I figured out what works for me. I'm okay. So you can profile for autonomy. I would encourage reading Elena Smith's research on that. But I definitely, if we're trying to convince an athlete to do something that is ultimately, if we're telling somebody to do something that is taking away autonomy, so we need to help them understand and realize how it's their decision. Um, how do you implement GPS distance in Hexis? Which model are you using for personalized nutrition intake? So we currently integrate with a range of GPS devices, Catapult, StatSports, etc. Each of those devices does produce a predicted energy cost of the session based on the locomotive data from that session. The original research behind that is some research from a person called Osniak, where it is looking at the various locomotive activities that are involved. So not just distance, high speed, acceleration, deceleration, etc. So That's how we get the energy cost, I suppose, similar to how you get it from a Garmin device. And then we do look at a range of locomotive parameters to determine the intensity. So we don't just look at total distance to determine the intensity. We will look at, let's say, a combination of things such as your accelerations, decelerations, high speed, to give a better indication of what the relative intensity of that session could be to better understand where that energy should be derived, or where those calories should be derived from a carbohydrate or fat perspective. When it comes to an option to copy ingredients, um, is there a way to, yeah, essentially put a 10 plus ingredients in every day for certain meals? Thank you for the question. Yes, our product team are very busy. We're very fortunate to be working very tightly with some of the elite sports organizations, um, who are providing consistent user feedback. So there's quite a lot of features and functionality, which I think a lot of people are going to be pretty excited about, both from a practitioner and an athlete perspective, over the coming, well, between now and the end of the year, there'll be quite a dramatic change, as well as quite additional, quite some quite a what would I say? What would I say without saying too much? So much more ability to integrate, a much larger ability to integrate. Um, but certainly from that experience perspective, that is something that the team are working on. The I have a question here. How do you find athletes' responses to adherence when you're looking at plans from Hexis or other platforms? Do they find it more user friendly or easier to follow? What's buy-in like? It's a really good question. So we see very sticky behaviors. And I think there's a number of predictors of those sticky behaviors. I think, first of all, if we're comparing traditional plans are templates. And we as practitioners will go in, we will do manual work, we will produce a template, and then somebody will be given that template. But the problem is if you adhere to breakfast or don't adhere to breakfast, so let's say I under consume breakfast slightly, my lunch is not calibrated in a templated plan. I was supposed to train at 10 for whatever reason, it's now been kicked to 5. So the biggest problem that we see in like traditional PDF plans, and the reason why I would say adherence is low and attrition is high, is because they don't end up reflecting the actual demands of today. So we've put right at our core this concept of replanning. So anytime an event occurs, everything can immediately recalibrate. So for example, if I was supposed to have a 900 calorie higher carbohydrate breakfast with, let's say, 160 grams of carbohydrate and 40 grams of protein because I was preparing for a Gaelic football session. If I underconsumed, the additional energy would then be immediately redistributed and replanned to the rest of the day. If my predicted session was different from my actual session, we then passively integrate and immediately take in that data to update what the recovery plan looks like as well. So if I did more or I did less on the pitch and the overall exercise energy expenditure was higher or lower, that is immediately reflected. So I think when we see adherence to what we've built, we see stickier behaviors with higher adherence. And I would generally say high engagement because they're also taking other data about themselves. So let's say an individual who's wearing a Garmin, they're seeing that data from their wrist or their chest strap being leveraged into another environment to create more value for them. So if we do even go back from a theoretical side of things and start to look at behavior change techniques, there is a behavior change technique called um, biowearable is not the word, biological information, and being able to leverage existing data about yourself to influence and drive another intervention. So I think we see that to be an important factor as well, and very much a completion of the wearable ecosystem. We have one question. Do you have a publication on the concept of autonomy that you can share? We have two publications that the papers are fully written, the data sets are there. Um, we have just not got round to submitting, which is just, honestly, it's just a function of team size. We're a small team, hence why we're always looking to grow. So if there's if there's interest out there, we're keen to hear from you. Um, we have too much data at the minute and too many research questions that we want to answer and have answered, but haven't had the ability to publish yet. It is definitely top of our mind. So always interested for people that can come in there as well. We have a question here. How are CGMs using your platform? Are you looking at indicators for fuel use, fuel levels dropping? So the honest answer is we don't integrate continuous blood glucose monitors at this moment in time. And we very much focus on understanding the energy and fuel requirements for the work that somebody's doing and are very embedded within that fuel for the work required paradigm. We've made a deliberate decision not to integrate them at this moment. Primary reasons for that are for us to make any use of a CGM, we would also, so we currently have activity data, we currently have um, food intake data. We would also want sleep data, which is something that the team are working on and will be released in October. So there's, let's say there's other parts of that contextual puzzle that I don't think it's right to make an inference until you have the full picture to be able to say that this is or isn't what it should be. Is Hexis biased towards backward looking data? I what an athlete has done, and to what extent is it looking at the training plan forward? So everything for us is really about you can only what would I say? Rephrase this better. You can only influence what you can do next. You can't influence the past. So when we look at our how we've built the core platform, we do look at things over a 72-hour period. So we take into context what's happened yesterday, as well as what you're preparing for tomorrow, before we make a decision about how you should be adjusting your intake today. So, for example, if you are taking part in a competition tomorrow, we would immediately be looking to increase your glycogen stores to the relevant amount and build in that carbohydrate load to make sure that you're better preparing for that session tomorrow. But again, we will also take into consideration what you've done either earlier that day or what you've done yesterday and what you need to do to recover from that. So again, I don't think it's about looking backwards or forwards. I actually think you always have to look in both directions and consider what are you recovering from, what are you preparing for, and where are you right now? And that helps inform what to do next. Perfect. I think we've answered most of those now. The make it quick. We've got a question here. Can you do a real or a full demo of the app and the platform to see how the system works? We can absolutely do that. I would say just drop us a line, info@hexis.live. We'd love to show you how the system works, how we're currently working with organizations, and as well as our plans for the future. So absolutely no problem. Maybe for time on this call, we might not give ourselves enough time to go through absolutely everything. Perfect. Thank you everyone for your time. I really appreciate it. We've run slightly over the 45 minutes, so I appreciate it's eating into the evenings. I've really enjoyed this. I hope to do this again. If people have questions, if people want to learn more about certain things, if people would like our opinions on certain things, or just a general discussion, we're definitely keen to start to have more of these conversations and just figure out how we can carry on in this infinite game and keep advancing and keep everything moving in the same direction together. Thank you very much. Take care.